Hi, my name is Amir. I'm co-founder and CTO of Baseten with exciting news. We're announcing that the Parsed team is joining Baseten. And I'm sitting here with two of their co-founders, Mudith and Charles, and just going to have a casual chat about what it is that they set out to do, how they see the space, and how them joining Baseten is going to affect our product and our customers. So let's start from the beginning. Like going back to the beginning of the life of Parsed, why did you start the company? What was the goal? What were you setting out to do?
Yeah, so we started off the company. Me, Charlie, and Max met at Oxford doing our PhDs. I guess like we saw O1 come out and solve maths and coding with kind of validated reasoning traces, and we thought, what is the most ambitious thing we could do? We had a particular interest for regulated industries like healthcare, and we thought, how do you get language models to do hard things in things like healthcare, legal, insurance? And what we thought were specialized language models that were learning from their production environments. And so we set out in pretty delusional way. This was pre DeepSeek, and DeepSeek came out very early days of Parsed. And then over the last 9 months have really just been exclusively working on how do you train language models to do hard things, particularly open source models, and get them to outperform the closed source models and get better over time.
At least at a narrow band of specialization, be able to outperform them.
Exactly. And I think our thesis was if you want language models to do hard things in particular verticals, they should be getting better at that vertical from their production environment.
Yeah. And I think this was a pretty contrarian take when we started. If you were to tell people that you're going to not only match the performance of GPT-5, but outperform GPT-5, you really have to kind of like back your product. And I think the thing to us that differentiated us from all the other kind of fine-tuning as a service products that came out was we really focused on how do these models actually learn from the real world. We call it touching grass, and we think like this is a massive part of what's been missing so far. There's this like virtuous cycle that people enter into where the model is deployed in production, but if your only instrument for correcting its behavior is prompting or swapping to another model version, that's a really blunt instrument to like achieve the behavior you want. We think that like models should be learning from their interactions with users and like the end like kind of users of the product.
Right. So let's talk about that. So you've told me this before too, is that unlike what some folks think, that the algorithm wasn't going to be the hard part, and the magical part was going to be the learning signals.
Yeah.
Can you say a bit more about that and like how where touching grass comes into the picture?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people, when they think of fine tuning or post training, they imagine the hard part to be writing the code that actually does the gradient update. And I think we've seen a lot of services and products spin up, whether it's the OpenAI fine tuning API or a bunch of even inference providers trying to offer these kind of like one click platforms where you can go in and choose a model and fine tune it. And to us, like this is a very clean problem to work on, but it's not the right problem that's going to allow you to get models to actually perform like hard tasks in the real world. To us, it wasn't about how do you actually execute the gradient update. It's much more about what is the learning signal that is telling us what gradient or what model behavior to change in the first place. And so that's what we focused a lot on. And that is many things. And it's a whole end-to-end thing. It's like, what evals does the customer care about? How do they define good on their task and bad for their task? What is all the latent context that they have as domain experts on what that looks like? And then how do we bake that into some sort of harness which we can hill climb and make the open source model basically number go up on that benchmark.
Number go up,
Yeah.
as is the theme of our conversations recently.
I was going to say as well, I think one of the interesting points on that is when we started, everyone's like, why don't you try and productize something straight away, right? It's like, this isn't scalable. And that's something we heard over and over again. And again, like maybe we were delusional, but we just were so heavy on being high touch with the customer, really deriving what the right learning signal was. And in the end, I think that's the thing that has differentiated us. We haven't tried to just create this like one click unified. Yeah.
Magical experience. Yeah.
And we'll get there. Like the dream is to get there. But right now, like there is so much value in handcrafting those learning signals.
And we learn so much from these reps, from these engagements with individual customers. Like patterns will emerge. We did this on the inference side too. It's like a lot of things are productized that, 2.5 years ago, it was very much like us working closely with customers and seeing those patterns and then coming back and impacting and informing the product decisions and the DevX decisions. So I can imagine a similar thing will play out over here too. Speaking of beating closed models, again, at like narrow band of capabilities, give us some examples of actual real world examples of having been able to achieve this?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll quickly talk about healthcare scribing as one of our first and big category of customer, and then maybe you can talk about the expansion into coding and other domains. But healthcare scribing was where we started. It was where there was a huge volume of traffic going through. It was a specialized task of turning a doctor-patient interaction into a clinical note. A really difficult task. Customers were using Sonnet 4 at the time, and GPT-4. And at that time, there was just this dogma that you had to use the biggest model to get this to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it's a pretty narrow task when you think about it. It's like very mappable from input to output. And so we spent a long time working out what is the right way to train language models to do this effectively. And this is where we actually ended up iterating on some of our research, like iterative SFT, rationale guided training. And what that looked like was being able to train a language model somewhere between 30 to 80 billion parameters that ended up outperforming the biggest frontier models at the time. And then when you pair that with an inference product like Baseten, it meant that you could serve that reliably and at scale. So that was a big category of customers that we started off. We then kind of expanded into insurance as well. Maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah. And I think we all know that if you're trying to train a general chatbot, of course, like the foundation model is going to win. You just need the biggest general model you can. But to us, like these tasks that were emerging that were actually being used in enterprise and like we're seeing traction and a lot of volume taking off were narrow enough that we felt like there was enough like concrete and narrow learning signals such that you could optimize for it. And I think this goes back to this point, right? Of like, once you have that learning signal that is very difficult to ingest into a prompt, and you're operating on just like, how do we make this like number go up again? Then you can actually achieve like really good things with these open source models.
Makes sense. On the eval side, you have said it's like evals are the foundation of getting this level of specialization and getting it to work. So talk to us, what does it take to have a good eval suite for the kind of use cases that you're talking about, and how is that different from generalized benchmarks that you see for any model being applied over there?
Yeah, I think there's like two types of eval signals that we focus on. So the first is, I guess, a condensation or distillation of everything that a customer knows and how they might codify what good looks like on a task. And then there's evals, which are almost defined by the end user's interaction with the model themselves. So that looks more like customer feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down, all those sort of signals. And so we knew that in the messy world of reinforcement learning, it's really difficult to just take this end user's feedback and try and steer the model directly based on that at the start. There's a lot of extra learning signal that we're throwing away when we use reinforcement learning. And so to us, starting with a core set of LLM as judge evaluators, which are derived exactly from what the customer cares about on a particular task, was a really good way to like warm start these models. As Mudith has mentioned, this led to a lot of our research, like iterative SFT and rationale guided training. But once you've kind of got this core set of LLM as judge evaluators, like these are really hard to do, right? And so it's our job to marry, I guess, the customer's expertise with our ability to come up with these like very low variance, consistent and calibrated evaluators. And that's what we start with, and that's what we hill climb. And then it's after you get to that stage where a model is like kind of pretty good already, that you can start to think about, okay, how do we do reinforcement learning on like customer feedback where we don't know why it was good or bad. We just know that the customers told us, okay, this particular output is good or bad. And that kind of like breaking down of the different types of evaluator signals has been like really useful for us.
Yeah, so let's talk about that part. So how do you measure in a world in which now that model is running in production and is getting feedback, how do you measure the improvements and the compounding improvements in this iterative cycle?
Yeah, so I guess at the end of the day, the user is always right, and like the customer of our customers is always right. And so no matter how good you're performing on, for instance, your LLM as judge evaluators, like it is always about how are people responding to this in the real world. And so I guess just our insight, and I think a lot of people now looking into this idea of RL for post-training have concluded that, okay, no matter what our initial evals are, we need to be making the user satisfaction go up or the user acceptance rate go up or whatever type of model it is. It's all about like the end user. And the great thing is that like with reinforcement learning, we can directly kind of optimize for that.
And that was definitely an iteration in our thinking. Like initially we thought the static evals that were handcrafted from domain experts within companies was the gold standard, but then we learned it is the end customer that matters. And so winning on an A/B test and actually learning from the other customers that are providing feedback is where the real value is.
Makes sense. At some point, you both had told me that part of the parsed plan was to ultimately build inference as well. And it's like that is where the value is unlocked. And we just talked about like that cycle of training and inference. But like now you get inference for free because we're part of Baseten. What does that unlock for you? Like as you think about like tightly integrating training and inference together, and getting that for free, as you think about how that changes the sort of span of possibilities, what does that look like?
Yeah, I might quickly touch on from a customer perspective why it's so nice when they are together, and then I think blue sky thinking of what it looks like when they integrated. Importantly, we started off not really caring about the business model side of things. We just wanted to do, the thing that would make
It's cool stuff.
language models do cool things. And then we very quickly realized that you have to run inference, and that's where customers understand that they have to pay, and it's a really, really hard problem to solve. Training, on the other hand, I think there are teams within companies that want to own training, and when you're outsourcing both inference and training to two separate vendors, it makes it quite challenging for internal teams to feel like they're owning the intelligence. And so to me, one of the most exciting things about joining Baseten is that companies really can feel like they're owning their intelligence. People know inference is a really difficult problem. I don't think there's any question of people trying to own that internally. And when you pair training with that, it really simplifies and minimizes the friction for those customers.
Yeah. I guess the really exciting thing about having inference so tightly coupled with training for us goes back to this idea of models touching grass. It's really difficult to get these learning signals from the real world if you're operating purely on the training side, and then the customer runs off with the model and they're deploying it, and there's a lot of integration and like even just logistical issues there. But if it's a tightly coupled feedback loop, again, like what we can actually do is take continuous signals from the customer using the model in production. And suddenly it's not, we're treating models as these static snapshots anymore. It really is moving towards a future where every time the model interacts with a user, like that is able to be derived into some sort of like learning signal, which will make the model better. And I think like that's the really exciting world of language models to me. It's not about snapshots of Opus 4.5 or whatever model that's being released and you're waiting for the new one to come out. You own your own intelligence, and like that intelligence is getting better every time you call the model.
I'm excited about this. I have been excited about this. We've been working together now for a while with you guys as a customer of our training product, which by design is this lower level of abstraction and agnostic of the training techniques. And so like having worked together on individual customer engagements and bringing the training and inference together as two separate companies, I'm really excited about doing that as one company moving forward.
And you probably noticed we were trying to build a wrapper around an inference product. And so
yeah,
it does make a lot of sense.
White label Baseten, why not? I've been reading, of course, a lot of the research that you've published, and a common theme that came out is this idea of big token as a concept. Let's talk about what is big token and how do we defeat it?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up big token because I think the first time I used that terminology in the blog post, Mudith was worried that it would be too spicy, and I think he tried to veto it. But I think it's stuck, and I'm glad we're going with it.
And I'm glad it's stuck as well.
I think like to us, we always saw Dario and Sam and like the leaders of these big closed source labs harping on about this idea of the base models for open source have some delta between them and the closed source models. And then the assumption they draw from that is that open source is never going to win because the base model performance is never going to match what they're able to achieve with the big labs. And to me, this always seemed like a kind of shaky argument, I guess. I think when you acknowledge that fine-tuning and post-training does work, it doesn't become about the performance of the base model anymore. It's like how high quality is your learning signal and then how well you're able to integrate that into the model. And I think we all know scaling laws work, but I think one thing people do forget about scaling laws is that the compute axis is on a log scale, so you see a straight line going up. But what you have to remember is that to get to each new iteration of GPT-N, you're spending an exponential amount more of compute. And so to me, this seemed like a really like kind of suboptimal outcome for customers trying to use these language models to do very repeatable tasks in like narrow domains, hoping for your behavior to be baked into the next iteration of GPT, whatever pre-training data and RL environments that they're training on. Let's just cross our fingers and hope that like what we want is going to be in there. If you know what you want, you should be able to specialize a model to be able to do that. And I think we hear this, like we're starting to hear this with a lot of customers now. It's almost like kind of carbon emissions. It's like we're 100% closed source this year, and next year we want to be 0% closed source and all on open source. And so that was a really strong message that like resonated with us, and we thought, okay, we have the tools to be able to do this. I think the big labs have a big economic incentive to say the generalist models are always going to win. Like just keep calling us and we'll charge you token-based usage. But I think that narrative is going to like kind of fall down in the next few years as people realize how powerful post-training can be.
And this is the timing, right? The time is now. Like this wasn't the state of play in January when we started, but the tailwind now is huge. And you hear so many customers saying that. And so that's, I think, the most exciting thing about timing.
Totally. And you get to take charge of the intelligence layer, and you get to run it. And it's so much faster, more reliable, and cheaper to pay for the underlying compute and doing inference yourself as opposed to paying someone else per token pricing.
Yeah, and to us, it's not about big token versus little token. To us, it's about big token versus democratized token. Like we want people to be able to own their own intelligence, and we now see a really straight shot to get there. Reinforcement learning is really powerful. Everything before that in terms of like the evals and the learning signals and like integrating that into an inference product. And we think that's the kind of future of AI that we want to live in, not a world where you're kind of swapping between like 3 or 4 big closed source providers.
Exactly. AI is done in 4 companies and the rest of us are token consumers. Let's do it.
Cool.
I'm excited.